Welcome to the Levrige Show. This is Brett Ingram. And today we want to cover whether or not it's better as an entrepreneur to brand yourself or to create your very own brand that is based on a product or some other service that you provide. So does it make more sense to be the brand yourself, or does it make more sense to brand something with an outside name other than yourself? And so let's cover the good and the bad, because there are advantages and disadvantages to both. And what it really comes down to is sort of who you are as a person and what you really want to accomplish. What things are more important to you? So let's start off by branding yourself. And let's talk about what's good about that. The positives of branding yourself. And when I say branding, what I mean is, do you want to be the name on the door? Do you want to be the name that people are associating with? Instead of ABC Company, right, which would be a product or a brand that you've created, you could be, Brett Ingram Incorporated or whatever. And so you could be Tony Robbins, or you could be ADP Security. So it really just depends on what it is that you want to do. But those are the two options. And a question that comes up a lot is, what is the best thing to do? So if you want to brand yourself and you want to be the brand, the greatest part about that is that you become the asset. So you create the market power yourself. When you start to build a following and everybody starts to connect with you, sometimes it's easier to get started that way, because if you have a message, if you have a way to help people, then people are going to resonate with that. And that's going to be something that you can sort of lean on to be able to build the market. And then you have that marketing power, which is a really great thing in terms of a lot of your future success. It gives you options for direction. If people are following you and you decide you want to create these kinds of widgets, and then you want to go into this kind of service business, you have some bit of flexibility and some bit of translatability because of the fact that people are following you. They didn't fall in love with a particular product or service. They like what you had to say. They like who you are. And so they follow you because of that. And that gives you a lot of different options because of that. Now, the other thing is, this can be more secure in the long term. Because if you are the brand, if you are the asset, the economy is going to be less likely to affect you. If people like you, they like you. They're not going to like you less just because the economy starts to go bad, or they lose their job or things like that. The other thing is, you're much less susceptible to competition, because being a person as a brand, it's a lot harder to replicate that. It's a lot harder to steal that for somebody and be exactly what you are to people, the way that you are. There's going to be some difference, whereas a product may be a little bit easier to copy. So you're unique, you're a genuine article, you're by yourself. It can also be very fulfilling, you know what I mean? It can be very rewarding personally to feel like, all these people like me and they're looking up to me or whatever else. But now let's shift a little bit and let's look at the bad. The bad is that it puts you in a position of pressure. You're the front man or woman. You need to always be creating content. You need to always be on the forefront of things, because you are the voice. There's no such thing as I don't really feel like it today. There's no such thing as I don't feel that good today. There's no such thing as, I'm not in the mood to do this today. People expect a certain thing out of you. That's the way that you need to be. And so it gives you a little bit higher burden from a personal standpoint in terms of what people are going to expect from you. The other thing is, quite frankly, you may need to speak and attend events. If you are the brand and there's a demand for you, even if you're a YouTube celebrity or a social media star, there comes a point where that may only take you so far. You're going to be asked to speak at things. People are going to want you to come to their convention or to their seminar or whatever and speak, maybe their company. And so it's flattering, but it's also work. And so if that's something you're afraid of, or you don't, you're okay being behind a camera, but you don't really want to be on stage, then you need to really think about that. Some of this comes down to your own personality, and some of it comes down to your goals and what you aspire to do. The other thing is, like it or not, you may be criticized. You could be the most saintly person, and your intentions can be 100% pure. You want to save the world. There are going to be critics. There are going to be people that take shots at you. If you have a thin skin and that's going to bother you, getting attacked on social media, having people call you out on this, people digging through your history and your background to see if what you're saying meshes with what you're trying to tell other people. All of those things you're going to be susceptible to. So if you don't like your personal life, if you want your personal space, you don't want people invading it, then maybe it isn't the right thing for you. You may not be a celebrity on an A-list type of thing like Hollywood, because depending on what industry you're in, it's probably going to be on a smaller scale, but you'll be a mini celebrity within your own niche. And there's a price with that. There's a public expectation. There is a public vulnerability where people are allowed to attack you in a way that it's much more difficult to do with a product, or at least it stings a lot less because it isn't personal. Now, the other bad thing about it is if you are the brand, you are not nearly as sellable or investable. So let's say that you decide you're going to do this, but in 10 years you want to retire. If you retire, you're sort of retiring the brand. You can't really pass the torch to somebody else and say, okay, now you're going to be me. There is no other you. So it's the blessing and the curse. It's going to be very difficult to sort of cash out of the business of yourself. You're sort of stuck with it until you don't want to do it anymore. And then there's going to be limited value for other people because you are the asset. If they want to buy what you're offering, it's going to be difficult for them to get the same kind of value, or at least offer you anything close to what you might think it's worth, because quite frankly, you're the brand and they're not going to be able to replicate you. All right, so now let's switch and let's take a look at, instead, if you wanted to do a brand, if you wanted to promote a brand instead of yourself. Now, one of the positives about that is it becomes really easy to get to know your customer base, right? You can do analytics, you can do surveys, and you can really hone in on who that customer base is. It may be a little bit more difficult if you're the sort of personal celebrity. But you can get that down to a pretty good science. You can get the demographics. You can really learn who your target customer is. It's usually typically very focused. And so that also helps you in terms of being able to determine what people want in a concrete way. If you know who they are and you know what makes them tick and you know their demographics, it also is going to help you to really get a good understanding of, okay, what are these, what does my market want? What does my customer want? You could survey them, you can ask them. There's a lot of other things that you can do to give them exactly what they want, and you can measure all the results. So let's say you decide we're going to offer this new feature with our product or our brand, and you go to offer it, or this new product rollout, and it doesn't do well. You can just make an adjustment. It doesn't kill your brand. You just move that off the shelf, or you transition it into more of what people want, and then you can pivot that way. So it makes it a lot easier. You can be in the background. So quite frankly, if you prefer anonymity, if you want to be able to build stuff and make money, but you don't want to be the public face, you don't want to be interviewed, you don't want to be speaking at events, by having a brand, you're much less compelled to do it. You may still get requests, but it isn't going to affect your brand if you don't do it. If you do it, you can get more exposure, but no one's expecting it of you in the same way. So you can be in the background pulling the strings and making a lot of money. The other thing is, and this is a huge point, it may not matter to you now, especially if you're young and you have a long-term mentality, but you can sell, you can cash out. If you have a brand, if you have a product that everybody associates with and it makes a lot of money, it's very easy to find a bigger company that wants to buy that from you and pay you a lot of money for it. So there's an exit strategy that actually works. You can get people to invest in it. You can get people to buy it from you, and you can cash out and make a ton of money doing that. So that's a huge advantage to that way. But just like with branding yourself, branding a product or a business also has a bad side. You're much more susceptible to the economy. I mean, look, if your brand is, whatever it is you're selling, I don't know, luxury watches, and now the economy takes a turn, your customers may not be as easy to find. They may stop buying those sort of, impulse purchases like that because they're expensive. So you could be susceptible to the economy. The other thing is you're very susceptible to competition. Your brand is what it is, but if you're making iPhones and you're making iPads, you could be on top of the world one day and Samsung can come the next day and eat your lunch for you because they can innovate. They can see what you did and they can replicate it. The speed of replication in today's society and economy is so quick that unless you really have some crazy competitive advantage, it's hard. It's really hard to stay on top. It's easy to get there sometimes, but it's not always easy to stay there. You also might be limited in your direction. If you're making, just to go back to the watch example, and then you decide, you know what, I want to get into fitness equipment. Well, that may not really translate that well. It doesn't mean you can't start a whole new business, but you can't really pivot and get into fitness equipment that easily because you're selling luxury watches. It's a completely different market with a completely different customer base. So that's something that you need to be conscious of is you need to really love whatever that your focus is if you're going to limit yourself that way. And then the last thing is it may not be as fulfilling personally. I mean, if you are somebody who thrives on attention and likes to be in the spotlight and wants to be speaking from stage and having people come up to you and saying, I can't tell you how you changed my life. I followed this and I did that and I can't even believe where I am now. So that aspect of it for you, it may not be as fulfilling personally if you're sort of stuck behind the computer in the office somewhere. Even though the brand is crushing it and you're making a lot of money, it may not be exactly what you want. So those are two things to consider, but the idea and the decision of whether to brand yourself or brand a product or a company is a really big decision, and you need to really think it through and think through the pros and cons, get to know who you are and what resonates for you best. Not what objective people advise you to do, but what you think is best for you, because at the end of the day, it's your business and it's going to be your daily activity and your daily immersive sort of adventure that you're going on. So you want to make sure you do it the right way. As always, if you have any questions or comments, share them with me at levrigeshow.com or tweet them at #levrigeshow. And until next time, make it happen.